Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of a series of Lesaffre UK and Ireland webinars, which will be on the subject of sourdough. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our speakers today. My name is Sara Autton, and I'm a baker and technical manager at Lesaffre UK and Ireland. And with us from the home of the Lesaffre Group in Lille in France, we have Pascal Leujeune, one of the many microbiologists who works in the Central Research and Development Department. Welcome, Pascal. And we also have Laurent Soupiron, who is an expert in the field of sourdough applications, particularly in the industrial bakery sector. Welcome to you too, Laurent.
Good morning.
Thank you both for being with us today. I also welcome Gülten Yagma, who joined the UK team late last year, but due to the lockdown, is currently confined to her home in Turkey. She instigated and put together the nuts and bolts of this webinar, which I hope you will find interesting and informative. Thank you, Gülten. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, so please post them in the chat bar at the side of your screens, and we'll answer as many as we can at the close of the session. So, on we go. The natural process of fermentation has been going on since the first microorganisms colonized our planet. But the first deliberate use of fermentation to enhance food and drink quality is actually relatively recent. It is known that Sumerians were consummate brewers, and archaeological evidence has shown that the ancient Egyptians were probably the first to master the use of sourdough to improve their bread. Moving forward in time, a few thousand years, the Lesaffre Group has been developing and refining their expertise in fermentation technology for more than 160 years, supplying yeast to the food, drink, agriculture, pharmaceutical, and biofuel industries around the world. Sourdough is a complex world in which Lesaffre has developed its expertise for more than 30 years. Traditional breads have potential added value when they're made with sourdough. Sourdough consumption, as we know, is on the increase, and consumers are more willing to recognize and value these breads as they become more widely available. Bakers can adapt their well-known processes to take advantage of these developments. The combined resources of Lesaffre UK and Ireland and the Lesaffre Group are at your service to help you to develop any bread product with our technical know-how, our ingredients, and training if you need it. And we can help you to develop bespoke sourdoughs suitable for your own processes and products so that you can continue to satisfy and delight your customers. So I'm now going to hand over to Pascal, who will take us through the microbiology of living sourdoughs. Over to you, Pascal.
Thank you, Sara. Sourdoughs as says Sara, is the only way to make breads for 1,000 years before baker's yeast was found. From a microbiological point of view, it's a fermentation from microorganisms of the flour, which will be fermenting the flour and the water, the dough, to make bread. To go a little bit deeper in it, sorry, here it is. To go a little bit deeper in the flour, and I will speak only about spontaneous sourdough. We will see the other one after. The flour contains a little bit of microorganism, but from a very high diversity. It's a very diverse biotope. By the technique of sourdough, which is the refreshment, we will change it to, at the end, only a few type of microorganism, but a very, very huge quantity of them. We are talking about billions of microorganisms per gram. So the aim of the sourdough and the refreshment technique is to select and to make it grow in order to give the sourdough all the benefits we want: dough leavening, acidification, taste, and increase of shelf life. In terms of microbiological microorganisms found in all over the world, there is a lot of strains used, bacteria and yeast. But some are very often present. We are talking about Lactobacillus plantarum, Lactobacillus brevis, Lactobacillus paracasei, and almost the most well-known Lactobacillus franciscensis. In terms of yeast, most of them are from the species of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, like baker's yeast, but also much more typical yeasts like Kazakhstania humilis, which don't hit the maltose and which is in very accordance with certain type of bacteria. So the main origin of the flora is the soil and the sourdough management. To take another point of view, how we create this biomass. This biomass is created generally by two refreshment in the traditional techniques. First refreshment here, and we grow from almost nothing to a very interesting part, but we will increase at each refreshment the population. What I want to focus on is the fact that if you are using starters, you only have to make the final sourdough. And if you are using ready-to-use sourdough, you don't have to make a sourdough anymore. In another way to explain what happens during the fermentation, we have microorganisms, bacteria and yeast. They are producing enzymes, amylase, protease, which will change the flours to create nutriments, sugars, amino acids, which will be able to make it grow of the growth of the microorganism, and so on and so on, and higher and higher. But by the way, the microorganism will also produce byproducts like acids, alcohols, and superior alcohols, which are really interesting in taste, aroma precursors, and a bunch of active compounds where we will see the effect in bread making. So when you had a sourdough, you don't only use and had microorganism, you had all of this. You modify the flour, you had enzymes, you had nutrients, you had microorganisms, and you had all the products of the fermentation. So a sourdough is not a source, only a source of microorganism, but a source of all of this. That's why it's not just an additive, it's a way to produce bread. The different types of what can be produced by sourdough, yeast and bacteria. First of all, of course, CO2 and alcohols, the main product of fermentation. The consequence of this production is the gas production, so the leavening of the dough, and the aroma precursors, so rising power, flavor, and crust color, because you're producing let's say sugars and amino acids will color the crust. The acids, of course, because the bacteria are almost acidifying bacteria, will also have a great impact in aromas, but also in texture because it will change the gluten network. Enzymatic activity like amylase, protease will change the texture and also create a lot of precursors. And specific compounds due to the specific strains will have a great impact into shelf life or rope inhibition and also water binding, dough elasticity, and so on. So when you are using a sourdough, you are playing on all these parts. In terms of strains, there is three main types of microorganisms. Of course, yeast, and don't forget it, it's the main way to make the dough grow, the yeast included in the sourdough. So producing CO2, but also superior alcohols and aromatic compounds, which are really involved in the, let's say, the flower smell and fruity smells. And on the bacterial parts, mainly two types of strains. The homolactic, we are producing mainly lactic acid, which increase the acidity of the sourdough, which will have impact on the shelf life, but also amylolytic and proteolytic enzymes, which will modify the bread texture. And heterolactic bacteria, which also produce lactic acid, but also the main tracer of the, let's say, sourdough taste, the acetic acid, but also a lot of superior alcohols and aromatic compounds. So it will participate to the decrease of the pH, the increase of acidity, but also a lot in typical flavor of sourdough bread. In the different type of product we can propose in the range of the sourdough, the traditional sourdough, the baker makes all. He makes the biomass, he makes the final sourdough, he makes the bread making. So it's a very, very long, let's say around at least 3 days, and most of all, more 5 to 10 days to generate a very, let's say, standardized and always the same sourdough. But if you use starter, Lesaffre will make the part of biomass production, and you had the final biomass directly in the one-step sourdough. So the baker will make the sourdough and the bread. If you use ready-to-use sourdough, Lesaffre is making the biomass and the final sourdough. So you had it directly in the mixer. So you only have the baker's part to do, but it is very, very interesting if you make long fermentation, final fermentation. With the devitalized sourdough, in which you, let's say, you stabilize the biomass, we also make the sourdough, but it is really interesting when you have short bread making. So it's very aromatic by itself. That's all for my part. Thank you for your attention. And Sara, I give you the audience.
Hello. Sorry, a bit of a hiccup there on the IT. My apologies for that. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for that, Pascal. There's a lot of very interesting information there. Don't forget you can ask questions. Don't forget to post those in the chat section, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar. I must admit, I had not appreciated before that the addition of sourdough is not just the addition of the bacteria, but also everything else that they've produced. So just before we go on, I see some of you are already voting in our poll. I'd like you to take part, if you don't mind, just to see which aspects of using sourdough are most important for you. So if you'd like to vote, you can vote for more than one of those if you like. I'll just give you a minute to have a go at that, and then we'll see what the result is. Very easy, just click on the ones that are interesting to you. And we'll see what you all think. Has everybody had a chance to vote? There we are. Now that's very interesting. Oh, it disappeared. The versatility was of least importance to you all. I think that's a very interesting result there, but good to know. So now we're going to get on to the interesting business of sourdough production in the bakery setting. And I'm handing over to Laurent, who will be taking us through the necessary steps to install a system from the initial decision stages to the monitoring and control of an established sourdough. Over to you, Laurent.
Thank you, Sarah. So before to industrialize the sourdough production, so you need first to determine what you want. And you will see that some parameters will be linked to the recipe and process. So it will be very important to determine what do you want. Do you want a liquid or a sponge type? Do you want a lactic or acetic sourdough? Maybe you will have some question about, okay, how much cost to put this kind of solution? Is there an impact for the choice of material, like the stirring system, like the CIP system? Do I need to use a specific kind of pump? What kind of analysis should I do in order to control my sourdough? So all this information will be very important to answer before to start the scale up of your sourdough production. And maybe it's more easy if you are using an inactive sourdough because it's ready to use, but it's becoming more technical when you are using your own sourdough, because don't forget that this sourdough will be your baking signature. So as explained by Pascal, so a sourdough, it's a kind of co-culture or symbiosis between lactic bacteria and yeast. And the choice of the inoculum will determine exactly the type of sourdough that you would like to reach. Do you want a lactic one? Do you want an lactic and acetic one? So the choice of the microorganism, the choice of the starter will be first one of the most important choice when you will start your production. The second step will be, if you know exactly what kind of characteristics you want to reach for your sourdough, it's also important to know what kind of parameters, like the type of flour, like the hash content, that the use of high or low temperature for the fermentation. So all these parameters will influence these characteristics and will have also an impact in terms of we can say the final characteristics of your sourdough in terms of pH, in terms of acidity, and in terms of ratio between lactic and acetic acid. So all these elements that mentioned in this table impact and also help you to manage your sourdough. At the industrial level, in fact, there is three, we can say, main solutions. You have the liquid sourdough solution, you have the stiff sponge sourdough, and also you have the ready-to-use. I will just focus now for my next slide on the direct inoculation. The first one is the liquid sourdough. In fact, you can use a starter culture inoculation, or you can use a live sourdough inoculation. From this solution, you have a lot of advantages. The first one, this is you can industrialize a big quantity. So what does it mean by big quantity? You can produce still 10 till 20 tons per day of sourdough. You have the possibility to create your own sourdough, your own signature. So you select the flour you want to use. You can choose your hydration. as a starter. You can determine also the time and the temperature, so you can do what you want. You have, of course, online control parameters, which will be very important, like a temperature, the stirring speed, the pH. You have the possibility with this solution to cool the sourdough for a few days. You have a very good hygiene system. You have a less handling operation, and you have very good traceability. Of course, you have also some constraint. This is an investment. You need some floor space for this installation. You can produce only one unique sourdough, and just keep in mind that you have some viscosity management to control, especially when you cool down the sourdough, so you change the viscosity. So for this kind of installation, you have some key points to control. The first key point will be how you will mix the flour and water, because you can imagine that to mix 1 kilo and 1 liter of flour and water, it's quite easy. When you do it at maybe at industrial level, like 5 tons or 10 tons every time, so it's become more and more technical. So the choice of this mixing is crucial. After that, you need to determine also the heat and the cooling power. The main target is when you are finished to mix the flour and water, you need to reach immediately the right temperature of fermentation. So it means that the heating power will be just to maintain the temperature of fermentation. After that, you need to have a good cooling power and to cool down your sourdough the fastest as possible. Another key point will be the quantity. Which quantity I should produce and which quantity I need to store. And one element very important, you need always to have more storage than production. Because if you have any problem during the production, you have the possibility to use more quantity in your storage tank. The other advantage of this liquid sourdough, especially if you have several units of production, you can produce on one site and after transfer your ready-to-use sourdough in a container and deliver your container to the other unit in the other plant. You have the possibility to extend the production by adding several more tanks. The key point will be the CIP. It's very crucial because it will avoid the risk of contamination. You need also to understand that what kind of mixer, what size of mixer do you have, and what is the loading time for feeding your mixers. Especially in UK, you have a high-speed mixer, so it means that maybe every 6 or every 8 minutes you need to load a new quantity, and you need to determine the speed of your pump according to this loading time. Another point will be the volume from your sourdough during the fermentation cycle. If you have sourdough containing a yeast, during the fermentation, the sourdough will expand. So you need to take it in account in order to determine the right volume per tank that you need for your sourdough. The other key point will be, as it was mentioned before, this is the viscosity, and to determine what kind of pump you need to choose for your sourdough. I mentioned some example of cost of installation. So according to the number of tank, according to the level of automation, the cost can be from 360 to 600 kilopounds for this kind of installation. Second solution, this is also a liquid sourdough solution, but this is a ready to use. So for this case, you can also industrialize some big quantities. So in this case, you just need to manage the containers. You have no preparation needed because it's already ready to use. No specific knowledge to use because it's managed by the producer of the sourdough. The storage and the shelf life of this sourdough is for a few weeks. Compared to the previous solution, which it was more for a few days. You have also a very good hygiene with the CIP system included. You have less handling operation. traceability, you have very low investment, and you have the possibility to manage several sourdough. The disadvantage, because it's ready to use, you need to use just one sourdough, which is not unique because it can be used also by your other competitor. The cost of installation for this solution will be around from 6 to, we can say, 18 kilopounds. The last solution will not be a liquid one, but it can be a stiff sponge sourdough. The main advantage will be the low investment needed for this solution. You have also the possibility to manage several different sourdough. You can also create your unique sourdough, so you can use also the type of flour, the type of starter, the fermentation time and temperature. You can produce small quantities, and you can manage also the speed of fermentation according to the temperature of fermentation, but also by adding some salt in your sourdough. What can be the disadvantage of this solution? The first one will be that you have only one unique temperature to manage. So you can ferment and you can cool. You can't cool, so you need to choose which temperature you will select. So it can be the high temperature or low temperature. The second solution will be, because you have only one temperature, is where to store your sourdough if the production is stopped. So how to stop the fermentation? Do you have a system to cool down quickly your sourdough? So it means that you have its probability compared to liquid one. You will see later that you are more handling operation. You need at least one person dedicated full-time for this solution. And also you will store your stiff sourdough in a tray, so you need also to clean your tray later. The cost of this installation will vary according to the size, and from 9 to 45 kilopounds for solution. So you can see an example of one industrial solution. So this sourdough fermentation room is divided in three parts. The first part is just dedicated to mix the sourdough. The second one will be to divide the sourdough per plastic trays, and we determine that one plastic tray is dedicated for one mixer. And after that, you will have the fermentation room for your sourdough. And we are using the FIFO management, so first in, first out system. So you can see that it requires more, we can say, people to manage this solution. So after that, when you have industrialized your sourdough through the liquid form or the stiff form, now the most important will be how to control your sourdough, how to be sure that your sourdough, and just to remind you that the sourdough, it's a yeast and lactic bacteria. And lactic bacteria is producing lactic acid and acetic acid. And these two elements will have an impact on the pH and the TTA. The TTA, the total tetrable acidity. So we will focus on this method in order to control the production of the lactobacteria through these two elements, the pH and the acidity. How? How to measure the acidity variation? When the lactic bacteria is producing organic acid in a dough, in fact, this organic acid will be present under two forms, the non-dissociated form and the dissociated form. If you look at the dissociated form, you can see that there is also the liberation of proton. And if when we measure the pH, you can see that the pH, in fact, is just measuring the proton level. So what does it mean? It means that if you are just taking the pH measurement, in fact, you have not a real idea about what can be the total quantity of acid produced, but you will just have an idea about partially of the production of this acid. So it means that you need to double check this information, the pH, by the measurement of the total teachable acidity. And the TTA will reflect really the real concentration of acid in your dough or in your or in sourdough. So for that, for the measurement of the pH on the TTA, you can use some machine which is able to measure automatically the pH and the TTA. How? In fact, you will do it in 3 steps. The first one will be the calibration of the machine. So you will use some 2 buffer solutions at 4, pH 4 and pH 7. After that, you will prepare the sample. So you will mix 10 grams of sourdough and you will add 100 milliliters of distilled water. You will mix together, and when the slurry will be rich, after you will measure automatically the pH. When the pH is measured, after we determine automatically the TTA by adding a basic solution. And you will obtain 2 measurements. The first one will be the pH as 6.6. So this is the European method for the TTA. Or you can reach 8.6, and this is a sour grade. And the quantity of basic solution used for reaching this 6.6 or 8.6 will give you the TTA. So you can see, for example, the type of curve that you can reach if you measure every 2 hours the pH and the TTA. You can see the drop of the pH, and after you will reach a stable level according to the buffer effect of the flour, but the TTA is continuing to increase. So this is why it's very important to have these 2 measurements, these 2 complementary measurements, because it will give you the real level of acidity or acidification of your sourdough. The pH and the TTA is the most simple measurement that you can do in the bakery. When you have the possibility to have more complete equipment in the laboratory, you can enlarge the control. The first one will be the pH and the TTA, and the second one will be to determine what can be the lactic and the acetic acid concentration. And you can do it through 2 methods. The first one is through the chromatography in liquid phase, or the second possibility, in which is more simple, this is to use enzymatic technology. After that, if you are also very large equipped in your laboratory, you can also determine the flora that you have in your sourdough, and also to characterize the name of your microorganism. But for this complete method of evaluation, you need a very large and skilled people for doing it. At the main level, at the most common analysis in the bakery, it will be mainly the pH, TTA, and some measure of lactic and acetic acid through the enzymatic techniques. So as you can see, so it's quite techniques if you want to produce and if you want to control the production of your sourdough. Sara?
Thank you very much. That's a lot of information there, Laurent. That's very interesting, lots of detail to consider, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you at the end of the webinar. So please don't forget to post your questions in the chat bar at the side of your screen, and don't forget that we will respond to any that we don't have time to discuss by email, so keep them coming. Okay, so we are going to pause again for another little survey, and this time we're asking you, what are the challenges for you when you're using sourdough in your products? Once more, you can select more than one answer, and I'll give you a minute to vote. So if you'd like to click and let us know. That's excellent. Has everybody had a chance to vote? Well, I'm very glad to see that sourdough doesn't scare you, as it really shouldn't. So that's very interesting results there. It looks like consistency is a key point. So I'm hoping that what Laurent has just been explaining to you will help you with that. Flavour profile is a key point, and I'm hoping that what we've been explaining, what Pascal has been explaining to you about selection of micro-flora will help with that. Can't help you with capital investment, I'm afraid, but certainly we can help with the training and the technical support. So thank you very much for your opinions. That's very interesting. So now we're just going to go on to the final section of this webinar, and this deals with the nutritional benefits of using sourdough. And we close with a brief summary of the points we've been discussing, and after that we will answer your questions. So there's been a great deal of research to confirm the nutritional benefits of sourdough in the diet that have previously only been very poorly understood. Dietitians and clinicians have variously recommended more or less bread consumption to their patients over the years, and current recommendations are for a moderate amount, whatever that might be, of bread, preferably made from whole grains, which provide a valuable source of fibre and minerals. However, more fundamental research is now putting some science behind the apocrypha, and some facts have now been established to show how sourdough can be used to make bread and fermented goods more healthy. So this first slide is very topical. The UK government and Public Health England are very keen to reduce the levels of salt, sugar and fats in our diets. And this initiative has been on the agenda for some years now. But the recently discovered link between obesity and the increased risk and severity of COVID-19 infection has made it even more of a priority. The good news is that sensory analysis shows that healthier recipes may be developed if sourdough is incorporated into the product. This means that we can reduce salt levels, we can reduce sugar levels, and we can reduce fat levels without significantly impacting on the taste and the mouthfeel of the products we're producing. Secondly, there's been further developments in the understanding of the role of phytic acid in the binding of trace elements and minerals in bread. Phytic acid is naturally present in grains, and it binds with these vital elements to produce insoluble salts which the body can't access. Phytase, which counteracts this effect, works best in a low pH environment, thus releasing these elements for the body's use. And this can be particularly valuable in gluten-free products, where the digestive systems of celiac patients is already quite compromised, so that they can be very prone to mineral deficiency in their diet. So by using sourdough, we can reduce the pH of our dough and our bread so that phytase can do its work more effectively. The glycemic index is of particular interest to diabetics, but in fact, we should all be taking this into consideration in our diet, as it is a key aspect of satiety and weight management. Bread, particularly white varieties, has always been notorious as a food with a high glycemic load, but sourdough can be used to help reduce this level. With the right selection of raw materials and a long, slow fermentation process using sourdough and little or no additional yeast, the finished bread can be enjoyed as part of a healthy diet, but without the glycemic overload. That graph you can see on the right hand of the slide there gives you an indication of the possible reduction of glycemic load when bread is produced, including sourdough. You may well be aware of the recent discoveries of the link between a healthy gut and a healthy mind. Are you taking care of your microbiome? Well, sourdough can assist there too. The particular fermentation path of sourdough on cereal fibres breaks them down in such a way as to provide valuable bifidogens which are beneficial for gut health. Healthy mind in a healthy body, as the saying goes. So sourdough fermentation can help with this too. To summarise then, sourdough can have a positive effect on the nutrition of bakery products, making them healthier, whilst providing a good eating experience for the consumer. Good flavour, good texture, good quality products, all thanks to those little colonies of microorganisms fermenting away in our sourdough. Mens sana in corpore sano, as somebody famously said once. So finally then, if you're thinking of developing and using a sourdough as part of your product range, here are some key points that you should be considering before you start. First, what is and what is not a sourdough? Well, yeasted dough used from the day before, an old dough for example, and spongin dough specifically made with yeast, both have very useful functions in the improvement of bread quality, but neither of them have a great deal of acidity which the sourdough provides, and therefore don't have the same beneficial effects, particularly on health. So the old dough, for example, and the yeasted dough, they have been leavened with yeast, and we have some interesting effects on crumb texture, some extensibility, it's for better tolerance of processing, and a little additional flavour and perception of freshness. Spontaneous sourdough, on the other hand, relies on the bacteria which are present in the flour, and they take time to acidify sufficiently to provide the benefits we've been discussing. But they also require some skill and knowledge to manage so that they remain active and viable. Accidental contamination with any undesirable microorganism is a risk, as it can take weeks to re-establish a fresh sourdough fermentation so that it has a similar flavour profile and viability to the one that's been lost. A more reliable sourdough can be established using a starter culture. Once again, there may be some risk attached if it's not managed correctly, but if the culture itself is stable and available, a fresh sourdough can be re-established more readily. Ready-to-use sourdoughs containing active microorganisms are a useful tool with a wide range of applications that can be used to develop a variety of bakery products. Management is simple. They just need to be stored correctly, usually refrigerated, to maintain their activity. And sourdoughs within active microorganisms are even simpler. These are still sourdoughs. You can't make them without making an active sourdough first. But they can provide a range of flavours and acidity levels depending on the cereals from which they are made. So you need to decide what application you'll be using your sourdough for, as this will determine the flavour profile you wish to achieve. Lesaffre has developed this palette of aromas and lexicon of common terms to help describe what you might be trying to find in your sourdough. Fruity, dairy, roasted, toasted, for example. They're all useful terms and terms that people can describe commonly so that everybody knows what they are talking about. The desired flavour profile you're looking for will then direct the type of sourdough that might be most suitable, more or less acidic, more or less active, for example. Whatever works for you. And for each of the products that we have in our range, for example, we have this aroma wheel, which will give you an idea of the kind of flavour profile you could expect when you use it at the level it's recommended at, for example. This one, this AS300P, gives a fruity flavour with quite a nice hit of sourdough, some spice, quite acidic, and nice and malty. That's good for rye breads, for example. You'll notice this side where we've got some sourdough attributes already described. We have this at this end, we've got the more fruity and nutty flavours, which tend to be associated with sourdoughs that are slightly less acidic. And then in the middle here, we have sourdoughs that are slightly more acidic. And then on the right here, we've got the very impactful flavours where the sourdough is very acidic. So this can be a useful tool when you're trying to benchmark what you are looking for before you make some decisions about how you're going to go about producing your sourdough. The next decision you need to make is the level of complexity you're prepared to tolerate in order to create your sourdough. So how difficult do you want to make it for yourself? Okay, all sorts of factors to consider here, including the capital investment required, the staff training that might need to take place, the amount of space that you have available for fermenting sourdoughs, all of those things that Laurent has been describing. If all of that frightens you, there are ways of adding sourdough and sourdough flavours and some of the rheological benefits of sourdough without making a living sourdough yourself. And Lesaffre can provide some solutions along these lines too. Lots of choice, lots of ways of doing it. It's entirely up to you. We can provide anything from selected starters right through to sourdough-based preparations that don't have an active microbiome. We can offer technical advice and expertise to help you develop whichever type of sourdough and sourdough process that you're looking for. So whatever your planned projects are, whatever you would like to get involved with, depending on how involved you want to get with creating your own, or if you want to just use a simple preparation, we can help you to decide what will be right for you and for your product. One of the tools that our technicians have at their fingertips is an app which can help to direct your choice of sourdough starter according to parameters that you yourself can select. For example, here, you can choose how acidic you want your sourdough to be. This one's fairly acidic. It starts from 3.6 pH going up to 6, which is practically neutral. And you can select whether you'd like an acetic sourdough or a lactic sourdough or a mixture of both. So you make a selection according to what you're looking for. Then you decide the temperature you're going to be able to ferment your sourdough at. So anything from 10 degrees, which is pretty cold, right up to 35, which is fairly warm. You can select what you're going to be able to manage for yourselves. And then you can put a tolerance or a range in there. And then you also decide the length of fermentation you can manage. So if you can only manage 12 hours, that's what you would put in. You can go up to 30 hours. This one is set at 24 for it as an example. So in this particular example, we're looking for a lactic sourdough where we can manage 25 degrees of fermentation and we can manage 24 hours of fermentation. Then we need to decide what kind of flour we're going to ferment, because that will have an impact on the kind of flavour profile we're going to get. So in this instance, we've selected a wheat flour with a typical ash content, a T55 wheat flour. That's a standard bread flour. And then we've made a selection here of the starter culture we'd like to use. In this instance, it's LV4, but we could have selected LV2 or LV1. And then we can make some predictions on how close we can get to the pH that you're looking for based on a range of fermentation parameters. So, for example, here we've got to a pH of 4 with a TTA of 4.3 using 24 hours of fermentation at 22 degrees. In this instance, we've got a pH of 4 and a TTA of 4.2. with the same parameters, but slightly more liquid. And once again here, pH of 4, 24 hours at 22 with even more liquid. So once you get to here with your sourdough being 100%. So essentially this is a liquid type sourdough using LV4 as a culture. Same fermentation parameters at 24 hours and 22 degrees. We've still got to a pH of 4 there, TTA 4.3, sour grad of 6. So with this tool, we can change some parameters here depending on what you can manage in your own process, and we can make some predictions about how close we can get to the pH that you're looking for, depending on what you can manage, so that you can make some decisions for yourself as to which kind of sourdough starter you might wish to use. So that's an exceedingly useful tool. So we're coming to the end of our time together now, but just before we start answering your questions, I have one final survey for you to take part in. We'd be very glad to know what your preference would be for the topic of the next webinar that we are choosing to plan. What would be the subject of your choice? And again, I'll give you a minute to vote there. Don't forget, you can choose more than one option. Excellent. Are we all done? Everybody voted? That's splendid. Thank you very much indeed for your participation. It looks like our next webinar will be about bread improver technology. That's excellent. Thank you so much for your help with that. So please don't forget to post your questions in the chat bar at the side of your screen, and any that we don't get a chance to answer, we will answer via email. So don't forget, if you think of a question after this session, it's not too late, you can still send it to me via my email address as shown on the screen, and we'll do our best to answer you as quickly as possible. So let's have a look, see what questions we've got. Right. Gosh. Here we are. Right. So the first question is here. My question is, I'm buying a ready-to-use sourdough. This gentleman is buying creme de levain. What is the powder form of this ready-to-use? Is it the stiff sponge that you mentioned? Who should I direct that to? I think I would say, Laurent, do you have an answer for that one?
So the question is, do we have the same type of sourdough we can see in a stiff form?
Yes.
In fact, crème de levain is a very specific ready-to-use sourdough, and at the present time we haven't the same equivalent sourdough in a powder or stiff form.
Okay. Oh, gosh. Wow. Lots of questions coming in. Thank you for that, Laurent. A question here also. Do your sourdough offerings all comply to the sourdough code of practice and can be called sourdough? Well, the answer to that is, I've also had another question about is whether the UK sourdough code of practice has been confirmed yet. And I can tell you that no, it has not yet been confirmed. We are expecting a high-level meeting with stakeholders to happen at the end of this month. So hopefully there'll be some progress on that very soon. So there is not an easy answer to this question. From a European point of view, there is still some debate as to what is and what isn't a sourdough. And the answer to that is still being determined. Again, there are some very high level discussions going on about that. But we have another aspect of this particular issue to consider, and that is not only what do we call a sourdough amongst ourselves as bakers and within the industry, but how do we actually communicate that to our customers and the final consumer, because there is also clearly some confusion within the consumer's arena as to what a sourdough is and what it isn't. So we are still some way away from complete clarity on this issue, but there is some progress being made. There is a question about whether the app is going to be available on an app store. And I am not aware of that. I don't know, Laurent, whether you are aware that the app is going to be widely available.
In fact, we have a link, and we can provide the link to everybody. And after they can download directly the link to their mobile.
Splendid. So the answer to that is yes, and we will provide a link. How are we going to do that? We'll provide a link. We'll put it on our website. So we'll make sure that the link is available there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just scrolling up and down the questions here. A question here. What percentage of sourdough should I add to my mix to get a strong flavour? I think that's probably for you, Laurent.
Or Pascal, maybe Pascal.
Pascal, probably both. Probably both.
Traditionally,
it's about intensifying the flavour of sourdough in the final bread. So managing the sourdough from that point of view.
Traditionally, and mainly in stiff sourdough, we use 30% of sourdough on final dough. But it will also, a lot depends on the time of the final, let's say, fermentation during the bread making. And the longest is the final fermentation, the less quantity of sourdough you can put in. Because part of the final production of flavors will be made during the bread making. And I think that actually there is a lot of development on this, saying that it's rather more interesting to produce the flavor in the final bread than in the sourdough, because it's included in the bread itself and not brought by an external sourdough. But generally it depends on what you want to have. And another point could be to mix several types of sourdoughs in your bread in order to have really your own flavor and typicity and let's say highest approach of taste.
I think that's very
there is many ways to do it. But
yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect. I'm not sure that very many people think about mixing sourdoughs in a dough. That's a very interesting approach to that. And I have one further question on processing. There's someone here asking about if they're using an autolysis method, what would be the minimum and maximum time to recommend to develop the flavor using autolysis?
So normally, if we are just talking about autolysis is just flour and water. And normally you let flour and water just slightly mixed, just in order to let all the flour component absorb the water. So in fact, you are not using any ferment during this stage. So normally the impact of this autolysis will be mainly higher water absorption, and also you can shorter the final mixing time, so which can help to keep some flavor not completely, we can say, destroyed by the oxidation of the mixing. But if we are talking just about autolysis, normally we say that minimum is 45 minutes minimum, just to see an impact.
Right.
Yes, but it would depend also on the ash content of the flour, and the more bran you have in it, the more time you have to make an autolysis to very hydrate the bran. And it will be also an impact on fermentation of bacteria, because the nutriments which are hydrated are more suitable to be fermented.
More available for fermentation.
And generally using bran, it's longer, I think. I should say.
So in fact,
under Laurent speaking, let's say 1 hour to 2 hours when you are using bran.
Yeah. So in fact, the autolysis, the development of flavour by using autolysis is not due to the autolysis itself. It's because the way that the dough behaves if it's been autolyzed. So essentially, because you're reducing the level of mixing because you've used autolysis, you are preserving more flavour within the sourdough from that aspect.
And also by the fact that you have a more open texture. So the mouthfeel is completely different. So the liberation of the taste in the mouth during chewing is different.
Yes, yes, indeed. Okay, so a further question. Can I make gluten-free sourdough?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay, Laurent, what would be different about making gluten-free sourdough from a standard sourdough?
So in fact, first of all, you need to choose the right raw material for the fermentation for the gluten-free. And the second thing is you have already available on the Lesaffre range some gluten-free starter that you can use for the production of your gluten-free sourdough. So you can choose some rice as a raw material, teff, buckwheat, and you can select a specific starter, and you can obtain at the end 100% gluten-free sourdough.
Excellent. Would there be anything different in the fermentation and time and temperature for gluten-free sourdough production, or is it similar to standard?
Good question. There's no typical answers about it because each cereal you are using, the main point is the available sugars. So the main point we see in your trials are the enzymatic content of the gluten-free cereal and flour. So it depends from one flour to another. Right. Gluten-free or not gluten-free, but the enzymatic content of the flour is a key point. Right. So we can measure it as a falling number or other techniques, and it will change the time of fermentation.
Very interesting.
The addition of certain malted flour and so on can be interesting also.
Oh, that's a good point. Using malt flours, yes. Another question about using Lesaffre starter cultures. Should I use salt when I'm making sourdough with Lesaffre starter cultures? What would be the effect of using salt?
As it was mentioned in the table, the salt can we can say control the start of fermentation of the sourdough. So, if, for example, if you want to extend a little bit the fermentation time, the fact to use sourdough salt can help to extend a little bit the fermentation. The second reason is especially when you are producing a stiff sourdough, so it will help to reduce the proteolysis, we can say, activity, and to get the stiff sourdough more easy to handle after.
That's good to know. Pascal, have you any comments about using salt in sourdough production?
Salt is reducing the fermentation speed as itself, as it changes the osmotic pressure. So it is used traditionally to let's say regulate the fermentation when the fermentation speed up too much. We are making some trials about it, not in adding sourdough at the beginning, but at the end of the sourdough to fix it.
Oh, right.
So it's a nice, interesting idea to slow down the fermentation, especially if you want to have a non too much acidic sourdough.
Right. Ah, interesting.
Adding when you reach the pH and the TTA you want to have, adding salt will slow the evolution of the sourdough after that.
Right.
Another reason to use also salt in the liquid sourdough, this is when you are using, we can say, a non-suitable stirring system. So if you have a stirring system, for example, too sharp or too fast, the risk is to have some lixiviation of the flour. So you can have separation between starch and gluten, and you can have some gluten around the stirring, around the agitator. And you can create some, like a ball of gluten. So the fact to use the salt will avoid this lixiviation and to keep very homogeneous the liquid sourdough.
Right, very interesting. I have a question here about the flavour profile and how it's affected by time and temperature. So there's two questions here. First of all, one aspect of sourdough flavour development is that it often increases in impact over time in the finished bread. So it often tastes more impactful the day after it's been made. And the other thing is the flavour of the finished bread likely to be affected by freezing it? Any ideas?
I would say a little bit yes, because in fact some flavor we can say in a water part of the bread.
Mm-hmm.
And when you freeze and when you defrost the bread, you have some water migration. And when you have some water migration, you have also some, we can say, loss of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have some loss also of sourdough flavor, as we have a loss of not traditional or normal, we can say, bread flavor too.
Mm. There's also the aspect of the volatility of acids during baking, for example. Some of the acidic content, particularly acetic acid, is lost during baking. I do know that. Might there also be an aspect here of some of those volatile acids dissolving in the moisture that's left in the bread at the end of baking? And perhaps there is a better dispersion of those flavour compounds through the bread while it's cooling. I'm guessing here, but it seems logical, a logical explanation.
Don't forget that the creation of taste and flavors come part from the fermentation and part from the baking. The baking is the strongest way to change and to give the final flavor. So if you frozen it and defrozen and rebaked, the baking part will not be the same.
Right.
So the flavor will not be the same between direct and pre-baked product.
Right. That's very interesting. Okay. I have a question here about the bacteria, Pascal, which you might be able to answer. Which types of bacteria are in the Lesaffre sourdoughs, and are they safe? I think this is about pathogens.
Of course, yes. I eat it every day. I'm the first trier of the bacteria. Yes, of course, and we are obliged to. There's no problem about it. The crucial point is the fact that in our product we have, like in the yogurt, in our living sourdoughs, a very high quantity of microorganisms, and so in terms of safety, this is a key point to have a very high amount of living cells, the one you want to have, in order not the development of the contaminants.
So in terms the level of bacteria that we have in our starters, for example, actually protects it against contamination by anything else.
Yes, and also the fact that at the level of use, we had as much microorganism in the final sourdough in traditional technique, in spontaneous sourdough. So we begin our sourdoughs with a very high amount of microorganisms, more than 10 billion per gram. 10 million.
Yeah, 10 million.
Up to 1 billion per gram.
Right.
So that's the final way. And in the type of microorganisms, we have selected our starters both on the ratio between yeast and bacteria in order to have a balance between the flavor produced by the yeast and the produced by the bacteria. And the other part is a balance between homolactic and heterolactic bacteria in order more to have, let's say, mild sourdoughs with the lactic one, and especially for the sugar dough, and more for specific sourdough breads and for application, for example, in mixed bread, rye and wheat, to have this real impact of sourdough bread. So we are playing both on bacteria, yeast, and on the type of bacteria.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just making a note here. That's great, thank you very much. This is an interesting one, I think, for you, Laurent. Can a liquid sourdough produced by a starter be used as a starter for the next sourdough production? And if so, what level should be used?
So the question is, can we refresh?
Can we refresh a starter made with a start? Yeah, a sourdough made with a starter, essentially.
So in theory and practice, yes, but you need to remind why you use a starter. The starter is using because you have the high level of population of selected lactic bacteria. So if you want, for example, homolactic or heterolactic, we can say sourdough, you will select homolactic or heterolactic culture. The problem is when you make a refresh after, so you will refresh by adding the other population coming from the flour. And you, after several backslop, you will lose the population inoculate first by the starter, and develop another population which is not be controlled in terms of type of population, and at the end you are not sure to reach exactly the same characteristic of your final sourdough.
Can change the flavour quite significantly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. A question here. When it comes to dry sourdough, why can we not get a fuller flavour as you do with using a true sour?
One answer can be when you dry the sourdough, all the volatiles are coming out. So the flavor profile of liquid sourdough and dry sourdough are different from this part. The other part is the fact that by drying, you are producing other type of flavors. So the type of flavors of powder sourdough and liquid one are different for mainly those two answers.
So it's actually the drying process for the dry sourdough actually changes the nature of the flavour of the sourdough itself.
Yes, by the fact that it produces typical Maillard reactions, and on the other side, the fact that the volatiles will keep out.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Further question about yeast type. Not sure which of you is the right, perhaps you could both comment on this. Is there a specific yeast type recommended when using low levels of yeast in a sourdough process? So what's the best yeast for sourdough, essentially? I guess this would be fast acting versus slow acting. A typical sourdough process is going to be a long one, so I would suggest that a slower activity yeast would be the most appropriate. Do you have a view on this?
You have two stages where you can add the yeast at the beginning of the sourdough or at the beginning of the final dough. In the beginning of sourdough, we recommend to use our own starters where the ratio between the yeast and the bacteria has been specified, and the type of yeast is completely specific to sourdough.
Right.
And for the final dough, I let Laurent answer.
So for the final sourdough, in fact,
For the final dough.
Final dough process.
For the final dough,
When
sorry.
you had yeast at the end.
Yeah.
For the final dough, so the yeast, the baker yeast normally is affected by some organic acid like acetic acid. So, for example, that if you use a sourdough level is very high, if the acidity in the final dough is very strong, so you will have an impact on the yeast activity.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, you need to put it a bit more. You need to increase the quantity of the final yeast, or in some case, you can use some yeast adapted to acid condition.
Right. Thank you. Why is sourdough? This is for you, Laurent. I think. Why is sourdough fermentation temperature so important?
In fact, it will manage the rate of activity of the lactic bacteria. So, for example, if you ferment a lactic bacteria at 20 degrees for 20 hours, you will not reach the same quantity or the same concentration of organic acid that if you are fermenting at 35 degrees. So the total quantity of acid produced will be managed by the temperature.
Right. So it's particularly important if you're creating a lot of sourdough, for example, like as you were explaining earlier on in the webinar about creating a liquid sourdough system.
Yeah,
it's very important that you keep your temperatures constant, so you get a constant level of acidity. Yeah.
So this is a big advantage of liquid sourdough. You have a constant, we can say, fermentation temperature during all the fermentation.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're nearly at the end. Just a few more questions. If I've kept my sourdough cold for a while, what's the best way to revive it for my bread production?
Pascal?
Yes. First part, to cool your sourdough to 4 degrees. And generally, when you revive it, you make a two-step sourdough. First one to really revive it, and then to make a real sourdough. So generally, it's, for example, in Germany, it's a well-known procedure to, during the weekend, they cool their sourdough, and then they make sourdough on just the day before they produce again, just to revive it, and then they do the real sourdough they want.
So essentially, it's just making a refreshment the day before you're due to use the sourdough.
If you stop it, they have to regain vitality. So to make, let's say, a blank sourdough to revive it.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you could, also, if it's been very cold, to revive it with, to warm it up for a start.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Also, as we said previously, when you want to slow down the fermentation, the use of salt, if you have to block your sourdough, is interesting. Not too much, not to kill it, but to use, let's say, around 1% of salt to very slow down, and the combination effect of temperature and salt will slow down the fermentation, and then you revive it by doing a refreshment and higher the temperature.
Right. Okay. And Laurent, is there any significant difference in terms of vitality between a liquid sourdough and a sponge type sourdough? Are liquid ones more or less active generally?
No, in fact, if the liquid or the stiff sourdough was managed or fermented in the, you can see the perfect condition, you have no difference of activity.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. Right, I have another question here. What is the shortest industrial process in your experience which will create a realistic sourdough flavour and texture? That's a good question.
This is to use a ready-to-use sourdough. This is the shortest way. This is the shortest way.
This will be short, yes, ready to use. But once you've got your ready-to-use sourdough, what would be the shortest bread making process? I presume after that, it's still going to need some time for fermentation to develop the texture and the flavour, isn't it?
I think if the sourdough is well active, first, it's mentioned by, it was explained by Pascal before. So you need time to provide and to produce more flavor during the final fermentation. So at least if you make bulk fermentation, like a 2 hours bulk fermentation, and at least we can say 2 hours final fermentation, you will create a very real sourdough flavor and texture.
I think also
what is very interesting, it's just to sorry to interrupt you, Sarah, but when you discuss now with all supplier of material, we are making an industrial line, especially for, we can say, artisan bread. Now it's very, very current to have bulk fermentation, but this is normal. But what is very interesting, this is to see that this company is supplying a line with 6 or 8 hours of final fermentation with different steps of temperature during the final fermentation. And the last industrial in Europe, in Australia, for example, they have invested in online with 6 to 7 hours of final fermentation with temperature starting at 20 degrees. After you have 18 degrees and you finish at 12 degrees.
Wow.
And this is very interesting because the flavor reach with this kind of process is quite very unique and specific.
Yeah. And what about,
this is a trend. This is a trend.
What about water levels? The water level is quite important also to get the open texture that people look for.
Exactly. It's a combination between the water level, the intensity of mixing, the bulk fermentation and the final fermentation, and also the fact to bake on the we can say on those stone oven tunnel.
Okay, well, we have one final question before we close, and that is, how can I make my sourdough acidify more quickly? Laurent?
So we can, in fact, you can play with different parameters. The first one can be the temperature of fermentation. You can use with a raw material. So if you use some flour containing more ash content or more bronze, it will boost also the acidity level. If you are doing liquid sourdough, you can play also with a stirring system. So because the oxygenation will also boost the acidity. It's a choice of starter because some bacteria acidify more than others. So so you can add some maybe some sugar, some malt inside in order to provide more available we can say substrate for the bacteria. Maybe I missed some other element, Pascal, I don't know.
No, it's the main one.
And temperature, of course.
Yeah.
Very
but as told Laurent in his presentation, separate acidity and pH.
Yes, of course.
It's more important to create acidity. That's why the ash content is very interesting, because the taste in mouth is more important.
Yeah.
The acidity, the higher the acidity is.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for your input. I think we're ready to close for today. But I must thank again Pascal Leujeune. Thank you for your expertise, and Laurent for your expertise and your experience. It's been a very interesting webinar. I hope that our participants have also thought so. And thank you to Autton for for putting this all together for us and for being our moderator. So I hope you'll all be able to join us again soon for our next webinar, which will be on the topic of bread improver technology. Thank you for that vote. So keep an eye on your emails for the invitation. Thank you very much for your attention and your attendance, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.